All right, so what we're going to work on today is finding our x and y intercepts and finding multiplicity. All right, so let's just look at the, try this. It says find the zeros and draw a sketch of the graph of the following. So this is just a quick review so we can recall what our graphs look like and when we have particular zero values or roots. So remember, when I'm looking for my zero values, my equation has to equal 0. So I'm just going to change my f of x, which is my y value, change that to 0. And I'm just going to rewrite this x plus 2 squared as x plus 2 times x plus 2. All right, and then I could just right from here make my t-chart and do x is equal to -2 and x is equal to -2. And what do you notice about my zeros or my roots? Well, my zero and my roots are equal to each other. So what I would like you to do is just pause the video and just graph this equation in your calculator just to see what the graph looks like. So take a pause right now and then come right back. All right, so you guys should have graphed this in your calculator, and when you graph this in your calculator, the graph looks something like this. So we have xy here, and at -2, which is my roots, okay, my graph is tangent. It comes down, hits the x-axis at -2 and bounces right back up. And the reason why that's doing that is because my roots are equal to each other. I cannot go past the x-axis. All right, so it comes down, hits the x-axis at -2 and then bounces right back up. Remember, that's called tangent to the x-axis. Okay, so let's take a look at the other one over here. And I have f of x is equal to x plus 2x minus 2. And again, I want to find my zeros, my roots. So I'm going to make my y equal to 0. And I'll have x plus 2, x minus 2. And same thing as before, I could make a t-chart, and I get x is -2 and x is equal to +2. So take a quick pause right now and just graph this equation in your calculator to see what the graph looks like. So take a pause. All right, so you should have graphed this in the calculator. And when you hit graph, notice that your graph crosses at -2 and +2. So your graph looks something like this. Your parabola. It crosses at -2 and +2. And the reason why it's crossing at two different spots is because you have two completely different roots. They're -2 and it's +2. So this, as you recall when we did the discriminant, crosses the roots, the graph crosses, so put down here, crosses the x-axis 2 times. Okay, so now we're going to start by finding a function's intercepts. The intercepts are where it crosses the axes. So the x-intercept would be where it crosses the x-axis. So number one, put down x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. And where it crosses the x-axis on your graph, your y values are always equal to 0. So you're going to do this and then solve. All right, so right over here, I'm going to find my x-intercepts. Okay, my y value has to equal 0. Okay, so set my y value equal to 0. All right, and now I have to solve this. So this is factorable. So I multiply the first times the last, I get -5x squared. What multiplies to 5 minuses to a 4? That would be a positive 5x and a negative 1x, and that gives me positive 4x. Bring down the -5, bring down the x squared, and I'm going to factor by grouping. So my GCF is x times x plus 5. I have a -1 as my GCF times x plus 5. So my factors are x minus 1 and x plus 5, and that equals 0. T-chart. we get x is equal to 1 and x is equal to -5. Now, if I just leave this like this and don't do anything else, those are my zeros. But I'm not asking for my zeros, even though my zeros are where it crosses the x-axis. I want what's called my x-intercepts. So your x-intercepts must be written as a point. So my x-intercepts are my x is 1, and what's my y value? My y value is 0. So x is 1, y is 0. And x is -5, my y is 0. Those are my x-intercepts. All right, so now to find your y-intercepts. So to find your y-intercept, you're going to make x equal to 0 because it's where it crosses the y-axis. So wherever something crosses the y-axis, your x value is equal to 0. All right, so I'll do that right over here, y-intercept. Okay, your x is equal to 0. This one will be easier. All right, so I have y equals, that's my f of x, right? Remember, that's just another way to write y equals. And I'm going to change all my x values now equal to 0. So I have 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 5. So I get y equals 0 plus 0 minus 5. So y is equal to -5. That's where it crosses the y-axis at -5. But again, it has to be written as a point. So my x value, remember x is equal to 0. So x is 0 and my y is -5. So that's my y-intercept, 0, -5. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about multiplicity. All right, so I am going to just move things up a little bit. Okay, so let's just take a look at the multiplicity over here. When we talk about multiplicity, your function must be in a factored form. So if your function is not in factored form, like my first one is not in factored form, I would have to put it in factored form. All right? You also have to have the roots. So if you have it in factored form, like I did right over here, I got this in factored form to actually find my roots to get my intercepts. It's not too bad. It's not too hard. So this is what we need to look at. If the exponent of a factor, we're talking about these parentheses here, if the exponent is even, the graph is tangent to the x-axis. So the graph will be tangent to the x-axis at its zeros. That's why you have to have the zeros. If your exponent of a factor is odd, the graph will cross the x-axis. And it will cross the x-axis at its zeros. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. All right, I'm just going to rewrite this. F of x is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 5. So we would want to factor this. Put it in factored form. So when I factor this, and I just did this right now, just before, I factored this guy, right? I did multiply the first times the last, did all that, did factor by grouping. And here were my factors. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite that. I have x minus 1 and x plus 5. All right, so notice, okay, here, the exponent for this parentheses, which would be right up here, if there's no exponent written, it's an exponent of a 1. And this exponent for this parenthesis, if there's nothing written, it's an exponent of a 1. So that means each one of these parentheses has an odd exponent. So put odd right underneath them. All right, now I also want you to write down what their zeros are. All right, so remember, so you could do this in your head. Think about, we would make a T-chart here, set each one of these equal to 0, which I did up here. All right, and so I would have x is equal to 1 and x is equal to -5. Those are my zeros. All right, so now I want to write down my multiplicity. All right, so it's a sentence. At x equals 1 and x equals -5, the multiplicity is, and what I put here is what I wrote right here, whether it's odd or even. So it's odd, and it's odd for both of them, is odd. That's why I put them both in the same sentence. If they weren't both odd, I can't put them in the same sentence. So at x is equal to 1 and x is equal to -5, the multiplicity is odd, right? Remember what I wrote over here. If the factor is odd, exponent, okay, it will cross the x-axis. So I'm going to put f of x crosses the x-axis, and it'll cross the x-axis at its zeros. We'll cross the x-axis at x equals 1 and x equals -5. All right, so that's how we do multiplicity. So we'll do another problem. Okay, so let's take a look at number 2. We have f of x is equal to 8x to the second minus 2x to the fourth. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find my intercepts. All right, so right over here I'll do my x-intercepts. So remember, to find the x-intercept, your y is equal to 0. So remember, this is my y value. 0 is equal to 8x squared minus 2x to the fourth. All right, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to factor, because I do see that I have a GCF here. So my GCF is 2x squared. So I have 2x squared times 4 minus x squared. And then I could set these equal to 0. But I notice over here on the right-hand side, I can actually factor that again. That's the difference of two perfect squares. So I have 2 plus x and 2 minus x. Okay, and then I can set that equal to 0. So over here on the left side, I have 2x squared equals 0. Divide by 2, x squared equals 0, so x is equal to 0. I have 2 plus x equals 0, so x is equal to -2. 2 minus x equals 0. Add x to both sides, and I get x is equal to 2. All right, so remember, these are not my intercepts. If I just leave it like this, those are my roots. It's where it crosses the x-axis. So I have to write it as a point to represent my x-intercepts. So my x-intercepts are 0, 0, -2, 0, and 2, 0. All right, now what I want to do over here is find my y-intercepts. My y-intercept, my x is equal to 0. So your y-intercepts are usually very easy. All right, so I'm looking for my y value. I'm going to take all my x values and set them equal to 0. So y equals 8 times 0 squared minus 2 times 0 to the fourth. Y equals 8 times 0 minus 2 times 0. Y equals 0 minus 0, so y is equal to 0. And again, you have to write it as a point. So my x value, remember my x value is 0, my y value is 0. So my y-intercepts are 0, 0. All right, so now I want to talk about the multiplicity. All right, so let me rewrite my function. So I have f of x is equal to 8x squared minus 2x to the fourth. So remember what I said before. This does have to be in a factored form. Okay, so I just did that over here to solve it. Okay, I just did it here. It was right in here. Okay, so let me just... All right, so my GCF is 2x. So I have 2x times, 2x squared, sorry, times 4 minus x squared. And then I can factor that again. So it's 2x squared times 2 plus x, 2 minus x. Okay, so now I want to see whether my factors are odd or even. So I look at the exponent. So this is a factor here. What's my exponent? My exponent is a 2, so that means it is even. Right here, this parentheses has an exponent. There's no exponent written. So that means its exponent is a 1. That means it's odd. And the same thing here, there's no exponents, that means its exponent is 1, and that is an odd exponent. What would my roots be? My zeros. So we need to write that down. So write down zeros. All right, so right here for the blue, the even one, okay? If I set this equal to 0, right, I get x is equal to 0. For the red one, I get x is equal to -2, and over here I get x is equal to 2. So just like I did before. Now I have to write this up. Now notice I have two different multiplicities. I have an even and I have two odds. So I'm going to write the odd one first. Okay? So at x equals -2 and x equals 2, the multiplicity is odd. So f of x crosses the x-axis at x equals -2 and x equals 2. All right, now we have to do the even one. At x equals 0, the multiplicity is, and what did we write here in blue? Even. So for f of x, when the multiplicity, when it's even, remember it's tangent to the x-axis. So f of x is tangent to the x-axis when, or at, x is equal to 0. All right, so we're going to do another. Okay, so let's take a look at number 3. All right, I have f of x times x minus 4. So this is nice because this is already factored for you. So we are first going to start off by finding our x-intercept. Remember to find your x-intercept, your y value is equal to 0. So I'm going to have 0 is equal to x squared times x minus 4. Make my t-chart. X squared equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. So we get x is equal to 4 and x is equal to 0. So remember, if I leave it like this, those are my zeros, those are my roots. As my x-intercept, I have to write it as a point. So my x is 0, my y value is 0. X is 4, my y value is still 0. All right, now I'm going to find my y-intercept. When I find my y-intercept, my x is equal to 0. So I am going to change my f of x to y and change all my x values to 0. So I have y is equal to 0 squared times 0 minus 4. Y equals 0 times -4, which is -4. So that's my y-intercept, 0, -4. All right, so now let's take a look at the function. Okay, so let's take a look at my function now. F of x is equal to x squared times x minus 4. It's already in a factored form for you. So let's just look at each of the factors. So this is a factor. And notice that my exponent is a 2. That means my multiplicity here is even. And let's take a look at the parentheses. There's no exponent written, so that's an exponent of 1. So that means my multiplicity here is odd. Let's write down what our zeros would be. So right here for my red factor, right, if I set this equal to 0, I'll just get x is equal to 0. And over here for my blue factor, I'll set x minus 4 equals 0, so I'll get x is equal to 4. So I have two different multiplicities. I have an even and an odd, so I have to write two different ones. So I'm going to start off by writing at x equals 0, the multiplicity is even. So f of x is tangent to the x-axis at x equals 0. And then I'm going to write the odd one. At x is equal to 4, the multiplicity is odd. So f of x crosses the x-axis at x is equal to 4. Okay, so let's take a look at problem number 4. And obviously you could see here that this is also factored, so this is nice. We're going to start off by finding our x-intercept. And for our x-intercept, our y value is equal to 0. So I'm going to change my f of x here to 0. 0 is equal to x times x minus 2 squared times x plus 2 squared. So I'll make my t-chart, but notice here this x minus 2 squared, x plus 2 squared, that is actually x times x minus 2 times x minus 2 times x plus 2 times x plus 2. So if I make my t-chart, notice that I get over here on the left x is equal to 0. In the middle here I get x is 2, they're the same. X is negative 2, and x is equal to negative 2. So these two here are the same, and so are these two, okay? And that's what happens when you have this x minus 2 squared, this x plus 2 squared, when you have those parentheses squared. All right, so those are not my intercepts, those are my zeros. All right, so my intercepts are when x is 0, my y value is 0. When x is 2, my y value is 0. I don't need to write this twice, just once. And when x is negative 2, my y value is 0. And same thing, I don't need to write that twice. All right, so those are my x-intercepts. Now let's find our y-intercepts. Y-intercepts, we're going to set x is equal to 0. So I'm going to solve for y, change this to y, and change all my x values to 0. So I get y is equal to 0 times 0 minus 2 squared times 0 plus 2 squared. So I get y equals 0 times negative 2 squared times 2 squared. So y is equal to 0 times 4, and that is y is equal to 0. So my y-intercept is 0, 0. All right, so now we're going to work on the multiplicity. Okay, so here's my function. F of x equals x times x minus 2 squared, x plus 2 squared. And that, like I said before, this is in factored form already. So let's take a look at each one of these. X is a factor. So it has an exponent. If there's no exponent written, it's really an exponent of 1. So that means it's odd here. Look at this parentheses. It has an exponent of a 2. So that means it is even. And for this parentheses, my exponent is a 2, so that's also even. So my multiplicity has two different multiplicities, an odd and an even. Let's write down our zeros. So for x is the x is odd here. If I set this equal to 0, I'll just get x is equal to 0. For this one right here, remember I had x is equal to positive 2. And for this one here, x plus 2 squared, I had x is equal to negative 2. Remember, I had 2 negative 2's and 2 positive 2's? All right, so I have to write two different multiplicities. So let's start with the odd. So at x is equal to 0, the multiplicity is odd. So f of x, when it's odd, f of x crosses the x-axis at x is equal to 0. All right, now let's do the even. And we have two of them. At x is equal to 2 and x is equal to negative 2, the multiplicity is even. So f of x, when the multiplicity is even, f of x is tangent to the x-axis at x equals 2 and x is equal to negative 2. All right, so that's it. This was a pretty long lesson. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night.